Ladies and gentlemen, we will now commence the high-level ministerial and CEOs roundtable discussions, the two of them, panel 1 and panel 2, on the lessons learned in policy and practice from the COVID-19 pandemic and building resilience to sustain Africa's educational system. After those two panels, I think we would have deserved that we take a break, and then we will break and we will have lunch after the two sessions. Therefore, distinguished participants, we would like to invite on stage the moderator of this plenary session, Dr. Obiageli Obi Ezek-Wesile, President of Human Capital Africa and Senior Economic Advisor at the Africa Economic Development Policy Initiative. Dr. Obi will be moderating the first panel on foundational learning. Over to you, Dr. Obi.
Ladies and gentlemen, the day is fast spent, and we really have to make this business happen quickly so that you can reclaim the time already lost. So instead of 1 hour, we're going to be having a panel of 45 minutes. So you better pray for me, because I'm going to need that prayer to keep my panelists, very distinguished people, within the time that we have. So the first panelist to come up and take a seat is my dear friend and sister, the Minister of Malawi, Honorable Agnes Makonda Ridley. Please clap. It's right next here. And Minister Mariotu Kone, who had given a speech earlier, Minister of Côte d'Ivoire. Please, Madame le Ministre, we'll need you to come up. Please clap. And she'll be followed by another dear sister, the minister from Gambia. Yeah, there you go. You look so beautiful. I was looking for you. Please sit right next to your sister. And then we'll be joined by dear friends that work within the education, the global education space, especially supporting the work that we do on our continent. Let me get Dr. Benjamin Piper, who is the Global Education Program Director for the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Please clap. And of course, our dear friend Dr. Margarita Focus-Licht of the Global Partnership for Education. She is the Acting Deputy Chief Executive of that important program on education. Please. So, very distinguished audience, we had cracked a joke earlier today that Nigeria has given a contribution to global discourse by saying we stand on all existing protocols. You know, that's a contribution, very major, because it saves me the hassles of having to read through the very distinguished profiles of the people on this panel. And the conversation that we're having this afternoon is on the foundational learning, especially as regards what happened as a result of the great pandemic. And today's topic, what was the impact of COVID on foundational learning across the continent, and how did countries deal with it as a means of ensuring that we can have resilient systems of education across our continent. So I'll quickly just go through with our ministers. It's historical and it's important to know, but I'd want it to be very short and snappy. So, so that way we can then look toward the future Resilience is about the capacity to prepare for risks and for opportunities so that they don't take us by surprise ever again. So the past is to say, Madam Minister, what was the impact of COVID on foundational learning in your country? What steps did you, as a decision maker, have to take to immediately respond to the crisis that was basically changing children, who most of whom were already changed before COVID? I'll start with you, Agnes.
Thank you very much. For Malawi, COVID, as we've heard earlier today, COVID basically exposed the huge weaknesses of the education system, such that the first order of business for me as minister was to see, are our schools ready to do that which we were asking them? And what we were asking them was, we deployed a standard operating procedure for how to prevent COVID spread and how to look after children and teachers that may be infected. And the first thing we discovered is that for years and years, we'd run schools without water. There were schools without water. Yes, it might look strange, but we had been asking teachers and other school leaders to produce quality education when there was no sanitary facilities in the schools, no safe water. That was, well, it shouldn't have been a big shock, but so COVID was good in that it exposed that. Then we also realized that we had to strengthen our links with the Ministry of Health because COVID was bringing an immediacy to the threat of life that we needed to make sure that schools were ready to deal with threats. And when you look at schools in Malawi, the very rural ones, the nearest health facility may be 50 kilometers away or more. And so we had to make sure that we work on that. We also had to make sure that we look at the state of teachers, because the teachers were themselves afraid. Teachers felt that they were besieged because they were being asked to be present in school regardless, when other workers could choose to work from home. Teachers couldn't choose to work from home. We didn't have the capacity to deliver teaching through e-learning or through the radio, and so we had to work with that and see what to do about teachers. We had a lot of other things to do, but I think to begin with, I would say that it exposed the weakness of the system.
I love the fact that you said it exposed, because those weaknesses were there.
Were there.
And so it took that kind of a pandemic to expose them to the policymaker. Yes. We would prefer that data that we track annually, quarterly, biannually, would expose these weaknesses to us better. And that takes me to the next question on, so there was catch-up that needed to be done. I'm staying with you, Agnes.
Okay.
There was catch-up to be done so that the children who were not learning even before COVID, now for that change could, catch up. And then there was the whole thing about the system is exposed for the cracks. What then has your thinking been? Have you been one of those just trying to, just get up and keep going? Or are you rethinking things now?
So for Malawi, we've decided to rethink our education for a number of reasons. COVID is just one of them, but we also suffer a lot of climate change disasters. This year alone, we've suffered 2 cyclones that have destroyed a lot of school infrastructure out of the infrastructure that we already do not have. So to look at what do, we looked at our data that shows that in primary education, we managed 90% net enrollment, but only 52% of those complete primary school. So we have 10% never at school, and then only 52 completing out of the 90%. And then we have at secondary school only 15% net enrollment, which means 85% of our young people are not in school. University entrance, I think it's even worse because we have less than 1%. So with that kind of data, when I sit here and say, for Malawi, we have decided that by 2063, we are going to be an inclusively wealthy, upper middle income country that is self-reliant. How are we going to do it? First, we want mindset change. the very mindset change that will enable us to believe that it is possible to start with that kind of statistics. When COVID came, it actually made the statistics I've given you worse, because after the 6 months of closure of our schools, we lost around 400,000 learners, 40,000 of whom were girls who had either become pregnant or gotten married. So we had a job to do. How do we fix a system where, first of all, we didn't have enough classrooms? How do we fix a system where, secondly, we did not have a strong digital platform to offer alternative ways of learning and teaching? We believe that our entry point is looking again at foundational skills, which if we fix, we believe that it will have an impact on repetition, it will have an impact on dropouts, and an impact on girls staying in school, an impact in bringing the 10% that are not in school, an impact in making sure all of them complete school. So
that's a really good place to land it, because, when a disaster of the scale that we experienced has happened, the worst thing that can happen is to just wake up and continue walking around like most of the people I saw at the airports on my way to Mauritius. The whole world has left home, and we're all just roaming the world as though nothing happened. And there's something good about that. But there is also something not so good about it, because the kind of reflection that is necessary for systems that have gone through the level of exposure that we've seen, for the number of children that are in school but not learning on our continent. When you said to me that you had to rethink and remember that the foundation is really where it should start. And this remediation by looking at foundational literacy and numeracy is what they constituted this panel for. Madam Minister, when you spoke, you talked quite well about the issues in education and the approaches to fixing things. Could you tell me, what 2 things did you immediately do with the school system, the primary school system? Because we're focused on foundational literacy and numeracy. What 2 things did you immediately do as soon as children and their teachers were back in the classroom?
Merci. Merci, Madame. Je voudrais dire que lorsque Covid est survenu en Côte d'Ivoire, les écoles ont été fermées 2 mois, du 16 mars au 17 mai 2020. Donc 2 mois de fermeture afin de limiter la propagation de la pandémie à coronavirus qui a affecté environ 7 millions d'élèves en Côte d'Ivoire, de tous les ordres et degrés d'enseignement, et cela a posé un défi majeur de la continuité des apprentissages. Nous avons élaboré une stratégie déclinée en 3 phases majeures, la prise de mesures sanitaires, des actions administratives et puis des actions pédagogiques. Mais je pense que par rapport à la question que vous posez ici, nous avons essentiellement été guidés par 5 principes. Le premier principe, c'est celui de la continuité éducative, qui s'exprime par l'exigence de ne pas interrompre l'action éducative, mais en même temps tenir compte des situations d'urgence que sont les conflits, les épidémies, les catastrophes, etc. Alors, l'une des caractéristiques de notre service public, c'était donc la continuité. Le deuxième principe de notre dispositif d'enseignement a été la gratuité. L'accès aux ressources pédagogiques diffusées par les médias partenaires ou hébergés dans les plateformes numériques était entièrement gratuit pour tous les élèves et leurs parents. Le troisième principe a été celui de l'inclusion, c'est-à-dire que le dispositif qui a été mis en place visait les élèves du primaire, du secondaire général, de l'enseignement technique et professionnel, du public et du privé.
I may not speak, but I do understand. That's why but to please the conference people, I will put it on.
Merci. Le quatrième principe, je vous ai dit qu'il y avait 5 principes, je vais rapidement rappeler. La continuité éducative, la gratuité, l'inclusion. Et le quatrième principe, c'était celui de l'équité, qui affirme que tous les élèves et tous les bénéficiaires du dispositif de continuité éducative et des apprentissages doivent avoir les mêmes chances d'accès, d'exposition, d'exploitation et d'appropriation des contenus d'enseignement. Et enfin, le cinquième et dernier principe que nous avons appliqué, c'était la pérennité du dispositif. Il faut souligner que la crise sanitaire de Covid a mis en exergue des défis à relever qui sont, entre autres, le développement de l'accès à l'Internet et aux terminaux en milieu scolaire, ainsi que l'implémentation du télétravail et la pérennisation du téléenseignement comme complément de l'enseignement présentiel. Voici en gros les principes que nous avons appliqués juste avec la survenue de Covid. Et c'est au vu de tout cela que nous avons, pour la Côte d'Ivoire, fait un saut, nous avons osé, nous avons pris le risque de penser à faire des états généraux de l'éducation nationale et de l'alphabétisation pour repenser notre éducation, pouvoir regarder dans le rétroviseur avec Covid, qu'est-ce qui s'est passé, qu'est-ce que nous pouvons améliorer, qu'est-ce que nous pouvons conserver. Et ça a donné un rapport qui nous permet aujourd'hui de faire des réformes aussi bien au niveau de l'apprentissage fondamental que dans le secondaire.
D'accord. Let me ask, if you were to judge between the lessons of resuming school and hearing that even before COVID, we had as much as 8 children who would go through primary school before the age of 10, they are not achieving literacy and numeracy in the continent of Africa. And then you wake up, it's after COVID, and the schools have resumed. I heard all the things you read from the notes, but I'm just sort of asking, what in the classroom are you doing differently with the teachers in the school system to change this data? Is there anything that we have learned as a result of the data that's coming out on this learning literacy, learning poverty that we're coping with on the continent? Yes.
Je vous remercie. Je crois que tout à l'heure, j'avais exposé sur les pratiques que nous estimons innovantes avec la mise en œuvre d'un programme d'enseignement ciblé, qui est un programme de remédiation qui s'adresse essentiellement à des élèves qui sont en difficulté, donner la chance à tout le monde, faire en sorte que tous les élèves puissent bénéficier du même type de formation, de la même formation, avec les mêmes éléments pédagogiques. J'ai parlé également de la mise en œuvre du programme PAPCE, qui est un programme d'installation des premiers apprentissages en français et en mathématiques. Je crois également avoir exposé sur un programme que nous appelons Programme national d'amélioration des apprentissages. Et en plus de tout cela, il y avait tout ce qui est production de ressources pédagogiques numériques qui nous ont aidés avec des fiches de leçons produites et embarquées sur la plateforme. Le téléenseignement, en tout cas, a été la première des choses que nous avons faites. Et c'est la leçon que nous avons comprise, c'est qu'il y avait plusieurs initiatives, justement dans le domaine de l'apprentissage fondamental, et que nous devions faire en sorte de fédérer toutes ces initiatives en élaborant une stratégie nationale des apprentissages.
You know, ladies and gentlemen, why I was prodding is that we often have found this desire to do something in education. It's never lacking. You see people, they say, education is in crisis, we have to get it right. But then we've spent so much energies on not the things that can address the critical challenges that we have in our education sector. And so when we have this kind of convening by ADEA and Albert and his team and colleagues from all the other organizations are wanting us to shape a direction for the future, it is a place where we cannot be diplomatically correct, right? Because that's not what the children want. So it does help that we're very precise in identifying what we may have been doing that will not address the core problem, and the things we need to do that will help us get higher learning outcomes for the children. And that's why I'm so excited that the women who are seated here today, all ministers of education, are people who understand the benefit of having learned at the foundational level. It created the basis of the achievements that we have seen at the individual level. And so when I turn to you, Ben, I am saying, if you were made the Minister of Education of the 54 countries in Africa, and you just entered office today, what would be the 3 things that you would immediately do? Because you want those numbers to change by the next time we are in Uganda. Where is the Minister of... Yes, you invited us to Uganda.
Kampala.
Before we go to Uganda, Minister of Education, 54 countries in Africa, what would you be doing?
So the one thing I would say is, after having worked with ministers for the last 15 years, I would say this job is too difficult. Being minister of one country, from what I've seen, is too difficult. And let one of the
please
ladies
clap
here.
for our ministers of education.
Yeah, I answered this question with a lot of humility, because anything I know of, I've learned from this continent, and educationists on this continent. And actually, that's the first point, actually, is that if you remember the figures that were just shown on the gaps between outcomes in numeracy and literacy in Africa compared to the rest of the world, we don't need a small improvement. We need a fundamental shift in learning. And I think what's most encouraging, my first point, is that there are programs and countries on this continent that have made substantial learning outcomes improvements and have done so at scale, Dr. Obi. That's really important. It's not a small, I'm a researcher, so I love setting up small-scale studies. If you give me time, that's what I would do my whole life, is a small-scale study here and there. But what we need are large-scale interventions that have not made small improvements, but have made large improvements. So let me give you a few that you might not know that are important for you to know. There's a program in Senegal, Lecture Port 2, that doubled learning outcomes. Yes, clap for Senegal. There's a program in Kenya, Kenya Tusome, that doubled learning outcomes. There's a program in Liberia, Read Liberia, very recent results that doubled learning outcomes. The fundamental thing we need to do to reduce that gap between Africa and the rest of the world is look to programs that have done it already and see what they've done. And think about this, the sort of approaches they've done. So that's number one, is look elsewhere in sub-Saharan Africa to improve outcomes. Number two, some of the lessons from those studies realize that all that matters, this is a controversial point, so I'll say it where everyone can see me. All that matters is the teaching practices of the regular teacher in a rural classroom. That's all that matters. We have
Can you repeat that again? Because
Yes.
it sounds too simple.
Yeah.
And therefore, there is always a tendency to struggle with things that sound simple.
Yes.
And they would like you to be a professor.
Yes.
So is there a way to say it so that these educationists will understand what you're saying?
Again, professor job is too difficult for me too, so let me try and do what I can. All that matters is the teaching practices of the typical teacher in a rural classroom. That's all that matters. And so if we're going to double learning outcomes, we need to think about the programs and the materials that those rural teachers would do. And as much as I love many of the policies we've talked about today, the ones that will reduce these gaps are the programs that focus on teaching improvement. Teachers want to teach better. They just don't need to. Madam Minister, I heard you say earlier, I remember this quote very, very clearly. She said, "Is the art of teaching was the old way. We need to think about the science of teaching." And I think if we are focused on the rural teacher, there is a science of teaching. There are a certain number of things that can help them teach. Lesson plans. The previous presenter talked about these lesson plans, 8-country study that showed lesson plans make a difference. Training that's focused on helping them with skills. I heard the deputy minister in Ghana talk about the teacher learning circles at the circuit level. I think that's the Ghana system. The circuit level where they are talking to each other. Coaching systems that work. All of those things working together to help the typical rural teacher to teach better on a daily basis. If we want to improve, that's what needs to happen.
Number three.
Number three, I can still talk? I thought that would be all I can say.
Number three, quickly.
Number three is to say, if you focus on learning lessons from elsewhere in Africa, if we focus on teachers and the rural teacher, number three, our continent needs better data. Better data. What's exciting, you saw the video from UIS earlier today. There are new, just released toolkits that would allow countries to do two things at once, Dr. Obi. Number one, to have data for policy dialogue. Madam Minister, what matters most is to have the data. You can have the conversation in your own country. That matters most. But secondly, you can have data that would be able to have Malawi and Gambia and Cote d'Ivoire compare with each other. So there are data tools that exist now from UIS that would allow every country in sub-Saharan Africa to have a country-specific data solution that allow both the country dialogue as well as the international dialogue, the regional dialogue that matters most. So number three is to think about what's the solution for my country that would allow me to do both. Talk internally about what to improve, and secondly, talk externally so we have some idea of where we stand in comparison.
Please clap for the notional Minister of Education of 54 countries. The reason that I asked him that question and I said to him that perhaps that number two recommendation sounded too simple for very distinguished academics in this room is because I know him to frame this as structured pedagogy. So for some of you that are really wanting something that would impress the president, when as a minister you're saying to them, there are just certain things we have to do differently in order to increase the learning outcomes. I wanted him to use his famous language so that you as a professor presenting to people in cabinet what has to change. You know our continent loves to hear big grammar. Huh? So if you say to them now that, we just have to get the teachers to teach in a different kind of way based on the science of teaching to enable the children learn, they would say that is so simple. So why haven't you been doing it? And yet you know that there are many reasons why that has not been being done. And so when I turn to you, Margarita, what are the reasons that you have seen around the continent? You've been at GPE and things around education for so long. Why is it in 2022 in Mauritius that we're learning that one of the simplest ways to actually begin to fundamentally improve learning outcomes is the way we teach? The teaching effect on outcomes is so deep. But we build fancy classrooms. We even want to condition some of the classrooms. We think that, more money is what we really need for education. Once we have more money, we'll have solved the problem in education. Why is it taking us this long to get to where Ben just pointed out?
That's a very good question.
You have the answer.
It's a very good question, and listening to a lot of really good things have already been said. I think we've been too focused on doing everything at once, and we have developed very fancy, expansive education sector plans that develop every single aspect of that needs to be covered in an education system, and we've sort of thought that we were going to implement all those things and somehow achieve the change. I think that what we really need to do is prioritize, and in a way that's very context-focused.
Can you hold on for a minute? Audience, can you speak after me? All we need to do is to prioritize. Guys, you have to repeat this because that's part of what we're going home with. All we need to do is to prioritize.
All right, well, it's maybe a little bit more than that.
Go ahead.
We need to really focus in on each context, and contexts matter. In each and every context, diagnose and assess what are the bottlenecks, what are the critical points that are blocking that, the fact that all children are learning, and what's behind those points, and what is it in each context that has the most potential to start delivering change.
Excellent.
And that needs to be context-based. If you set yourself in a country a goal to, for example, if you identify that pressure point is early grade reading and math, for example, then if you start focusing on that objective and saying what we're going to achieve now is to step ahead in early grade reading and numeracy, then you can work from that and really taking a system approach and saying what are the things that have to work seamlessly together in order to achieve that outcome. So instead
I hear you, Margarita. Assuming a minister is sitting here and thinking, there was a time when they told us that we just needed comprehensive education plans. And now they are telling us we should just take one thing and do. Would they be right to think that the confusion in what comes out for recommendations in education is also part of the problem?
Absolutely. And I think that's why this has to really be a dialogue at country level. And if you ask what it's going to take to make that kind of a step forward, you have to look at the interactions between, for example, teacher training and teacher remuneration and teachers' working conditions and curriculum. And not just the curriculum, but what it seeks to deliver and what the goals are through the curriculum. And you need to look at everything, even how the distribution chain of materials to school level, and all of those things are interlinked. And that's what the shift is. I think looking at it as this is our plan and these are all the things we're going to do is not the same as looking at this is the goal we want to achieve. And for that to happen, all of these elements and all these stakeholders have to work seamlessly together. And we're not sort of subdividing into... But can I say something about the importance also, for us as international partners, to align and coordinate behind the priorities that these wonderful ministers are setting. Our job is not to come with new priorities for you and tell you what you need to do. Our job is to support you in your priorities. And I think that there's a little bit of why things haven't worked is also about what we're delivering and how we're working. So
thank you.
I think we share very much in the responsibility.
Ladies and gentlemen, please help me to applaud the words of Margarita. You know, she said something very important, that partners should line up behind the priorities of the countries on our continent, that you as leaders are the main burden bearers. There's an African proverb that says, a person who is standing by the roadside and there's a heavy load next to them and they're just standing and just watching the heavy load, people will pass by and pass on. But when the person behaves as though they want to lift the load, those who are passing by will join them to come lift the load. That is to say that if any minister of education on our continent looks at all the data we have been seeing since we started this conference, and it did not in any way make them feel uncomfortable. It would be unfair for any other person to be feeling uncomfortable on your behalf. I mean, why should they feel uncomfortable on our behalf? This is our business. This is what should keep us awake. Madam Minister of Education of Gambia, when you listened to Ben and you listened to Margarita, tell me, what is running on your mind? As you get ready to get back to Gambia, you're saying to yourself, foundational literacy and numeracy, we have to crack this thing. We can make some quantum leaps in our learning outcomes with these children. What can I just see your schedule for the next 1 week? Share with us. What's your schedule looking like?
Thank you very much, Dr. Obi. Quite honestly, when you presented data yesterday on foundational learning, and it showed that in my country, the Gambia, about 95% of the children were not learning.
Yeah.
I can't describe how I felt. In fact, it's like at one point I did not understand what percentages were.
Oh, wow.
I was thinking it was too much for all that we think we have been doing. And we have not moved, it seemed. And today, the other data that was presented about the whole world and where sub-Saharan Africa is, I honestly felt, look, can I go home quickly and start fixing my house?
Yeah, clap if you want to, because that's the fierce sense of urgency that is necessary. But the second thing would be, I urgently want to go home.
Oh, yes.
But the things I choose to do when I get home can determine whether those outcomes improve or not. So the Ben gave us some ideas. Margarita gave us some ideas.
Absolutely.
So your schedule looks like what?
They're very good ideas. And you said something about African proverbs. And we also have a proverb that we also use in the Gambia, that if you want to have a clean bath and you want somebody to help scrub your back for you, because your hand definitely cannot reach that far, you must be scrubbing your own stomach. And then somebody will come and help and do your back. Yeah? That is, it's like that's what Margarita has just said, that we must lead the way. We must take the first step. We must let them know what we want them to help us with. And coming back to Ben, he talked about making sure that the teachers, or we put in place the right methodologies and practices. And for a long time, somebody talked about teaching all the children at the same time. We cannot teach the whole class at the same time and we expect results, learning outcomes from all of them. They are different individually. So they all have different learning paces. So we must take note of that. I have said to teachers, yes, we teach the whole class, and then chalk and talk. That's the old method. We must be ready to adapt new methods of teaching, new methodologies, new practices. And here we are talking now about child-centered methodologies are what we must use. Teachers have been using talk and talk, the whole method. They start the old method. They stand in front of the board, they teach the class, and they ask the children, do you understand? And all of them would say, yes, when more than half of them do not understand. And we think we have taught. We have not really helped the children to learn. We must be able to look at their individual needs. As a teacher, we should be able to assess the individual needs And when we do that, then we are able to have the right methods. We may be able to think of the right methods to help every child in our classes to learn.
Okay.
It is important to get every child to learn, rather than asking, do you understand? And they all say yes, when that's not true.
Excellent. Listen, I have somebody in this audience who has experience of going into the classroom, changing an approach to teaching, and suddenly children are actually making progress. Asia, I want you to spend 2 minutes to share and expand on what Ben said about the teaching. The teaching. We have to improve. Yes, I need a microphone to her. Because she walked into a Malawi classroom and experimented on this. Let's hear from you.
Okay, off the top of my head, I'm Asia Kazmi. I'm with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, but I'm a teacher of mathematics. And the things that we have to think about, and it's building on the point the minister just made, is where are our children now? Assess them. Where do they need to be? That's your curriculum goals. And how are we going to get them there? And we need to support teachers in a way that makes their lives easier, in a way that it makes them take up these new practices. We can't just demand, like we don't expect them to demand of children, we can't demand of teachers just taking up these practices without providing them support, practical support, demoing and working with them and planning with them in their classrooms. Things that they can use tomorrow in their classroom, coaching them and supporting them. Teaching should not be a unique sport. It should be a contact sport that they were learning with other teachers. But I think going back to very simply asking that question across all levels of the system, from the classroom up to international, but very importantly at the district level, at the national level, that question is, are our children learning what they were supposed to learn this week? And if they're not, what do we do about it? And remediating constantly. And this could be very simple. See me after classroom, have an extra lesson, but not leaving millions and millions of our children not learning by the end of primary school.
Thank you very much. Please acknowledge Isia's contribution. You know, it's very easy. Yes, I know we are up for time, but I'm going to take them as the concluding thoughts. It's very easy for us to sit here, and there could be people who are saying, but this is too simple. Why are we reducing a complex problem to improving the quality of teaching? And that once we improved the quality of teaching, that children would have higher learning outcomes. Is there anybody who is struggling with that? Is anyone in this hall struggling with the idea that if we improve the quality of teaching, children's learning outcomes would dramatically begin to improve? Anyone? Nobody wants to struggle with it. You're very smart. I tell you why you're very smart. Because some other people would say, how can you say it's only about improving the quality of teaching? We need this and we need that. You haven't touched on this. You haven't talked about the road that leads to the school. You haven't talked about, and they would build so many castles. We are in a restrained, constrained environment, and we're simply saying to achieve scale and to get the degree of leap in learning outcomes, we just have to be scientifically inclined to put in our weight behind the most important set of things that need to happen. Madam Minister of Education of Malawi, you now have a sense where you're saying there is a scorecard that gives me a sense of direction on how to improve these learning outcomes. Can you focus on this specific issue of the learning outcomes?
Thank you so much. For Malawi, with the background that I gave, we need to be improving from, we happen to be, I think, the first country that's adopted scorecard that Human Capital Africa, my sister Obi here, has developed. It's a scorecard that enables the monitoring and evaluation of whatever programs you put in place, but most of all, it's a scorecard that gives you a baseline. Where are you starting from? So I know we have low enrollments, especially in secondary, for example, and we have not achieved 100% enrollment in primary, but what actually happens in the classroom when the kids are in class? The scorecard gave us, we put us at, I think it's 53%. So some things are happening, obviously, but we have a long way to go to get to 100%. And for Malawi, what we've decided is we've articulated a vision that says, yes, what happens when teacher meets learner is the most important thing. But that covers a lot of things, because what does it mean when we say enable the teacher to improve the teaching practice, especially in the rural areas? Well, it means, for example, having effective teacher deployment policies. So in Malawi, we've decided that for our foundational skills to happen in real, we need to put our best teachers in the first 4 grades of primary school.
Clap now. You're just listening to a minister who is already gone beyond worrying about the problem to doing some specific things. Clap.
So to underscore the importance of that for us is that we do not have phase training for our teachers. So we do not have specialist teachers for early grades. What it then means is that we have to look at their training and particularly prioritize that group of teachers and support them in a particular way, because they will now carry the job of building Malawi's education. The whole of it will be on their shoulders. Next, we're saying, what will our teachers be teaching? We need to revisit the curriculum and see that the curriculum both responds to the fact that so far our children have not been learning, and also the fact that we adopted that long-term development plan that I said at the beginning that we want to be inclusively with. So then we also want to say overall teaching of, producing of our teachers, pre-service and in-service teaching. How are we going to do it to respond to what we now know, the kind of teacher that we need, the quality of teacher we need? Then we're also saying, hang on, yes, the teacher is very important. What the teacher does is very important. But what about the state of health of our children? When our children, and thank you for saying context specific, a lot of our children are malnourished. We also have high levels of hearing impairment, visual impairments. How are we going to make sure that every child sits in front of that teacher who has been enabled and supported, and they are actually capturing what the teacher is saying? So from there, we're going to say, how are we going to do it, since we don't have enough teaching learning materials?
She really is the one that should be the Minister of Education for all the countries.
So the story continues, and we'll share more in the next iteration. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Madam Minister, I want you to just 1 minute, because we need to be leaving. So 1 minute to sort of say, I have heard a lot of things from my colleagues. There are lessons that I'm taking away. And when I get home, I'm just going to do it.
Je vous remercie. Je crois qu'en plus des leçons qui ont été apprises ici, pour ce qui est de la Côte d'Ivoire, nous avons 4 priorités. La première priorité, c'est d'améliorer l'apprentissage fondamental, la pertinence des programmes et la qualité de l'enseignement. Ça reprend un peu ce que disait ma collègue.
Excellent.
La deuxième des priorités, c'est de réformer la profession enseignante avec tout un paquet également d'activités à mener. La troisième priorité, c'est d'élargir et d'encadrer l'offre d'éducation non formelle. Et puis la quatrième et dernière priorité, c'est de développer le numérique pour améliorer la gouvernance, la résilience, pour une offre équitable et inclusive. Vous aurez compris que tout cela nécessite bien sûr une démarche qui intègre l'individu, l'élève, l'enseignant, les lieux d'apprentissage, l'environnement socio-culturel immédiat. Et bon, c'est une approche de co-construction qui intègre le suivi, l'évaluation, la mesure, la redevabilité, la reddition, le financement.
Okay. Madam Minister.
je voudrais m'arrêter là pour dire que toutes ces stratégies dont on a parlé ici ne sauraient être mises en œuvre sans l'apport, l'accompagnement des partenaires. Merci.
Merci beaucoup. You know, what I would really want to do is that great program in Senegal, your neighbor, I'd like Awa. Where is Awa? Awa, the minister is available. She's going to take some ideas because that peer learning, country to country, is so important. There's so much that Côte d'Ivoire can teach the sub-region. We look to you. I'm Nigerian. We look to you for a number of things. You look to us for some of the things. You can look to Senegal. Senegal can look to you. So I do believe that some of these scaled programs that we have identified, that as you're going home, Awa is going to arrive in Abidjan and see how we can share some of these ideas so that we are really solving things. Madam Minister, you have the word to say, I am going home to implement. That's what we want to hear.
Yes, Doctor. I am going home to implement.
Good, sister. Ben.
I've got my notes. I've learned lessons from my colleagues.
Yes.
And there are things others are doing that we are not doing in the Gambia. And of course, obviously, if I had the opportunity to share my Gambia experience, I'm sure some of my colleagues would learn some new things.
Excellent.
We've all learned something, and it's good that we all go back home and try to see how we fill in the gaps. Thank you.
Excellent. Margarita, GPE, you said to them, we're very good friends. We will support you as you carry the load.
We are going to continue to put GPE's funding behind evidence-based priorities that will deliver learning outcomes.
Thank you so much. Ben, those are your 3 points again for the road. Quickly.
I won't say the 3 points, but I will say that I look forward to being able to amplify and connect other countries that are doing great work to improve foundational learning. The solutions are in this room. It's whether or not we can implement them at scale inside of government systems and then learn from each other using these peer mechanisms. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, my wonderful panelists, applaud for all that we have learned in the course of this conversation. I think if there's anything that Albert can take joy from, it is that we have leaders of education on our continent that are not being defensive about the problems. They are essentially taking ownership of the state of affairs. And these leaders are saying, show me the evidence of what works most, and we will implement. There's no better place to end this session than where we are right now. Thank you very much, everyone. God bless you.